Okay, this is chapter 43, which is gaining access and patient care. This is the best people to actually explain this as firefighters, because they're the ones that play with all these extra toys that usually EMS don't have, but we have to basically learn how to use some of them. Okay, basically, when you're sizing up the scene, whenever you're dealing with any one of these situations, stay alert as you approach the scene, survey from a safe distance. I know I've always been told by firefighters that if you actually put your hand in front of your face and put the thumb in, if you can cover the scene with a thumb, you're at a safe distance. Scenes are dynamic. Scene size up is a continual process. So what that means is that it's constantly changing. You never know. You might get a distracted driver barreling towards you. But in a lot of situations, we need to know that the scene can go from bad to worse or from worse to better. That's what it means that it's dynamic. Okay, 360-degree assessment. Assess the scene from all directions. Look for hazards, identify and trapped and ejected patients, and identify the mechanisms of injury. And the reason we try to identify the mechanisms of injury was to kind of tell us what type of injuries and how serious the patient is. Evaluate the need for additional resources. If you need somebody to help you with extrication, like fire department, fire suppression, fire department, law enforcement, hazardous material team, which is also fire department, utility company, which is the electric company or gas company, depending, air medical, which is your helicopters, or water rescue, which is normally your fire department also. Personal protective equipment, consider the presence of glass, sharp metal, flammable liquids, battery acids, and blood. Wear an ANSI or ICEA 107 2004 Class 2, Class 3 approved high visibility vest, so they can see you. And turnout gear is required for personnel involved in extrication too. Electrical lines, always assume down wires are electrically active. Stay away from vehicles in contact with power lines. Request assistance from the power company and advise patients to remain in the vehicle. And I know that I've always been told that, if you're inside the vehicle and the vehicle is not on fire, but it's covered by electrical wires, it could probably be the vehicle itself is grounded and it's probably saving your life. Scene safety, control traffic flow. The safest method is to reroute traffic to different roads. If traffic must be channeled around the scene, it should be routed at least 50 feet from the wrecked cars. Now, I've seen this question a lot of times. If the traffic must be channeled around the scene, it should at least be 50 feet. Okay. We're going to start going over questions so you can actually, we can actually start going over preparing you for the test. Okay. Flares positioned according to the formula that actually includes the stopping distance for a posted speed plus a margin of safety itself. So the speed limit is 20 miles per hour. Usually the stopping distance will be 50 feet. And the posted speed in feet is 20. So the distance from the farthest warning device would be 70 feet. And so on and so on and so on. Flares positioned in a straight road approaching the vehicle are moved into the correct lane before the reach of the edge of the danger zone. So basically what you do, you calculate it by using this formula. Let's say the accident happened when the speed limit is 70 miles per hour. Then basically you're gonna have to start putting these flares on the road at that distance, but you're gonna have to flare them towards the opposing side so they can see that they need to get out of that lane. And we normally put the ambulance in an area where it's not going to protect the accident itself. Usually in a curve situation, it's the same thing. But remember that you still have to kind of flare the flares into the opposing, the other, what do you call it? Uh, the other lane so they can go around. Now, all ambulances should carry flares or at least some type of device. First position in a hill, if it's like an uphill or whatsoever, same thing. And usually you got to also be very careful in a downhill area because normally if the vehicle, let me see if I can draw this. So the vehicle, let's see, because I saw this happening once. If the accident is right here and traffic is going this way, they might not be able to see it until it's too late. So you need to position the flares around this region right over here before the what do you call it, the incline and decline. I know that I remember back in the day when I was working in EMS, there's an area where I was working at that had it had a hill in the same position, which basically, and that was actually, they shaved it off, but it was like type of thing like this, and then it went a straightaway, and then there was another hill this way. And we were heading towards the accident. We were told that the accident was about maybe like 2 miles this way, when in actuality the accident was right here. So we're basically going at a high speed, and that's when troopers started using Camaros uh, as an intercept car. And all I remember is that this guy passed us going like faster than we were. And we were going code 3. So let's say we were doing about 70 miles per hour. And this guy was going like 90, maybe 100 miles per hour. And this guy went straight and hit the accident right here. So we got to kind of see the puff of smoke and the lights and sparks and everything. So he's kind of slowed down, and we noticed that the accident was right there. So we called dispatch that the distance that they had given us was wrong. It was closer, and that there was another accident. So we needed a couple of other ambulances. Remember, dispatch is not there. They're going by what the people that call 911 tell them. Control the traffic flow. Use fire apparatus and other emergency vehicles to block traffic. Position the ambulance so the loading doors are angled away from traffic, and use always face the oncoming traffic itself. Scene safety, alternative fuel vehicles, the ones with batteries. Hybrid vehicles use a combination of gasoline and electricity and high voltage batteries, and cables pose a risk of electric shock. Now, I mean, I haven't seen it in real life, but I've seen it in, what do you call it? I've seen it on videos on how sometimes the batteries from Teslas, just once they start going, they will not stop. So you need to be very careful with that. Natural gas and hydrogen are stored in high pressure canisters. It can actually pose a fire risk. And this is another type of hybrid vehicle once they're running on hydrogen. I haven't seen that many of them, but I've read about them. Uh, Undeployed airbags. Airbags are deployed with significant force. There, I remember they were calculating at about 275 miles per hour. And I got hit by an airbag at one point when I got into an accident. It didn't hurt right then and there, but after the fact, um, I felt my face burning and whatsoever. So if a rescuer is positioned in front of the airbag that can suddenly deploy, the force could cause severe injury. Now the question is, fire department normally cuts the electricity off. That does not stop the airbag from deploying. I mean, it helps it, but the airbag can still be deployed. Airbags must be deactivated before extrication. Scene safety, energy absorbing bumpers, and a lot of the cars nowadays have them. A piston system can actually become loaded on impact and spring forward after impact, causing an injury. And I know that I saw that once in my car where I backed off and I hit a pole, but it had one of these absorbing type of shocks in the back, and it was kind of indented. So when I went to go talk to the mechanic to see, I need to get it fixed, he looks at me, laughs, gets a hammer, goes under and just whacks it once, and it just pops back out. But I mean, it popped like, imagine if you're walking next to that bumper when it pops out and it hits your knee. Locate all patients. Some incidents involve multiple patients, and they are actually may not be readily identified. Look for patients on the site and in the immediate vicinity. Recognize clues that more than one patient may actually be involved, such as an empty car, a child car seat. Now, I know, I mean, I got involved with a couple of accidents. One of them, I remember there was a rollover. And we're going, it was in an area that was kind of hilly, so we were looking and we couldn't find the patient. So police department was there, fire department was there. So I just yell out, hey, scan out the patient's not in the car. He was probably thrown off. Let's look around. So we all started searching, doing a grid and started searching around the car and started spreading outward. And we still couldn't find the patient. So it dawned on me, one of the fire department people said, hey, maybe he's under the car. So we thought that maybe the patient was under the roof of the car. The car was the wheels were up. And they started trying to see if they can dig under and try, and there was no patient. So we were baffled. And eventually somebody told us, hey, you're talking about the guy that was driving the car, he got out of the car and walked home. Which is like, oh, thank God. Um, the other one I remember, an 18-wheeler was driving, and it veered off into the opposing lane, and a car that was driving the opposite way clipped the 18-wheeler in the back, two sets of tires, and basically it just mangled up the car. I mean, the 18-wheeler was driving like 60 miles per hour while the car was driving 60 miles per hour. So that kind of calculates around 120 mile per hour impact. So I remember we were extricating everybody out, and the mother kept on yelling, "My kids, my kids, my kids," and we could only find one. So I asked her, "How many kids do you have?" She said she had three. So I said, I kept on asking her, said, were they in the car? She didn't know. So we were, I mean, while we were trying to extricate her out, out of the car, they had to do a search for the kids. And luckily the kids had stayed with a grandmother at home. So you still have to search. Vehicle safety, have a fire extinguisher available. All ambulances should have a fire extinguisher. The vehicle must be stabilized before assessing it. And don't fall into what I fell into. I got in the car, thinking that it was stabilized and it wasn't, and it rolled over and I got trapped inside the car. That's what I found out what claustrophobia is. Um, Shut off the engine, set the parking brake, and use cribbing or shocks to actually help stabilize the vehicle. Before removing the battery, unlock the doors, lower windows, and move the seat back. Now, and a lot of times, because I think about 99% of the cars nowadays have electric seats. Um, you have to make sure that if the person is entrapped inside the car, you move the seat back. And the fire department, the first thing that they do is they open up the hood and they cut off the batteries. Before they do that, make sure that you can push the seat back. Because if not, no matter what you do, you're not going to be able to move it back, and it's going to make it more difficult for you to extricate this patient. Simple access requires no special tools. And I've always been told, um, if the passenger, if let's say the driver doors cannot open, try the passenger door. It's something as simple as that. So complex access requires the use of tools and specialized equipment. Residential access, first check all doors and windows. If you can contact the patient, determine if a neighbor has a key. If you cannot contact the patient, check with the neighbors. Uh, if forced entry is required, request the police and fire department to do it. If possible, wait for police before making forced entry. Breaking a window is usually easiest and less costly to, where you can actually unlock the door. Assess the hazards before making entry and select all unoccupied rooms. I'll select an unoccupied room. And so I was just thinking about, be careful with dogs. Sometimes the dogs might not bark. So breaking the windows is at least the best one to actually unlock the door and the least costly one. EMTs must actually function in patient care, approach the vehicle from the front. Remember, the person is sitting in the car. Uh, Normally, we want to have somebody going toward from the back to hold C-spine if it's a car accident. But the EMT should actually go from the front and tell the patient not to move. If there's going to be somebody going in back of them to hold their neck so they don't get furtherly injured. Advise the patient not to move their head. A simple access begin by trying the doors and door locks. If necessary, instruct the patient not to move while they're attempting to unlock doors or roll down the windows. Complex access. The quickest means is to break a window, wear personal protective equipment, tell the patient what you're going to be doing, and cover the patient with a blanket or tarp. Use the window farthest from the patient, and use a hammer or punch, a window punch, or spring-loaded punch. And this is the punch itself, the spring-loaded punch. And what it does is, it'll break the window. Now, if the window has film to actually make it darker, it'll keep the window in one piece. So be kind of worried about that. If not, it'll break all over the place. And it should break in this type of manner. Once you remove it, make sure that you actually push the glass outward. And if you notice is there's like a blanket here covering the patient. Okay. The role of the EMT, components of extrication. You do a scene size up, a stabilization, gaining access, disentanglement. And usually the disentanglement means disentangle the car from the patient, not the patient from the car. And then patient removal. Caring for the patient, maintain a spine motion restriction, perform primary assessment and manage any immediate life threats, perform a controlled rapid extrication, remove the vehicle from around the patient, and use adequate personnel. Use the path of least resistance also. Stabilizing the vehicle requires specialized equipment and training. Now, there's a couple of things that you need to worry about. Uh, Airbags, the airbags themselves, it's a rubber bag found in the various shapes and sizes that can actually be inflated with air and has great lifting ability. So if the car's actually like slumped down inside, you can put an airbag. And I know I've seen two types of airbags. One that's actually they connected straight to the exhaust of the vehicle, let's say the fire truck, and it actually inflates, moving the vehicle in a more stable position. There's also the come along, which is a ratcheting cable device used to pull in one straight direction. And usually, I've seen this um, in conjunction with the jaws of life attachment to actually remove the steering wheel, push the steering wheel out of the way. 4x4s or 2x4 blocks of hardwood cut approximately 18 inches long in sections. Cribbing, uh, a hydraulic power tool. I mean, the hydraulic cutter is a hydraulic power tool used to actually cut metal. The hydraulic ram, and it's usually a lot of these devices do the same, do several things depending on how you set it. A hydraulic power tool used to push or pull in a straight direction. Then you have a hydraulic spreader, which is a power tool used to open and spread and separate items such as vehicle doors. Jaws, it's a manual device used much as a ram would actually be used also with jack. Uh, you have the step shock, which is a set of several 2x6 blocks of hardwood cut in varying lengths and secured together to actually form steps. And we'll show you pictures of these in a little bit. You have also wedges. It's a 4x4 piece of cribbing tapered to an edge to one end. And then you have the winch, which is a powered cable, reeled usually electrically and hydraulically driven and mounted to a truck, which is used to actually pull or hold it in place, believe it or not. That's what I've seen it used for. Now, when you're dealing with upright vehicles, use step shocks or cribbing to actually mobilize the suspension. The shocks can actually be pushed in until they actually touch the undercarriage. The vehicle should not be lifted to place the shocks. To place the shocks. Remove air from the tires themselves also, so you have a more stable situation. And this is what they kind of look like. And these are shocks that you can actually put under the car, so you can actually hold it in place and prevent the car from going forward, backward, or to the sides. A vehicle on its side, do not enter the vehicle until it's stabilized. And there's a lot of things you can use to stabilize a vehicle. Rescuers use a variety of cables and cribbing to actually stabilize the vehicle. And these usually the cribbing itself, which basically you're going to prevent the vehicle from actually falling back down. It's actually, I've never really seen one of these. This is the cribbing itself, and this is also just to stabilize the car from actually moving either way. And they actually use these wedge pieces right here. If a vehicle's on its roof, the roof posts are not designed to actually support the whole weight of the car. Opening the door decreases the support provided, and cribbing and airbags can actually be used to stabilize the vehicle itself. Extricating the patient. The goal of extrication is to remove the car from around the patient. Patient's disentanglement requires specialized equipment, such as hydraulic spreaders and specially trained personnel. EMT maintains a spine motion restriction Remember, you can see these arms right there, and it's just not a set of gloves that we actually put there, but there's a firefighter back here actually holding C-spine while you're actually preparing the car, stabilizing the car, so you can actually extricate the patient correctly. You're using shocks themselves can be pushed in until they touch the undercarriage. The vehicle should not be lifted up to fit the shocks into place. The air should be released from the tires and the battery should be disconnected. Always disconnect the negative terminal first. Hydraulic spreaders themselves can actually be used. This is what we call the jaws of life to actually separate the doors open. And these are basically the cutters themselves cutting the B post. The A post being where the windshield is at, the B post is where the door is at. Cutting it off so you can actually get better access. Okay, cut the B post at the bottom of the vehicle floor also. At this point, once you cut the B post, you can actually spread the doors open both ways. Hydraulic cutters are used to actually cut the roof of the vehicle, and basically you're cutting the roof so you can actually peel it off so you can actually have better access to the patient. And in this case, they actually didn't peel it off, they actually took it off, but then in some cases I haven't seen them, they just cut certain portions of it and they just basically bend it backwards. No, you have the hydraulic spreaders are used to actually to free the patient from the entrapment by the with the dashboard. So if you notice here, what they're doing is they're actually putting the spreaders here and actually pushing the dashboard up so you can actually get access to the feet if the person is entrapped. It's one of the most common things that happens is that person gets entrapped from the knees down inside the car because of that. To prevent further injury to the patient, there is a best to remove um, him from vertically out of the car. Side impacts or hit protection airbags. Special considerations must be used when cutting the posts. Airbags can actually be deployed using extrication, causing serious injury. Other methods of access and disentanglement: popping off, prying a door, removing the windshield and rolling the roof. Patients entrapped in a vehicle on its side must actually be removed quickly. The windshield should also be cut. Uh, and a lot of the windshields actually are made to actually so they can pop out. Then fold the roof downward so you can get better access to the patient. Okay, and that basically is a chapter right here on extrication. Let me see if I can get the next one. The next one, I believe, it's hazardous materials. Let me just check. Yeah, hazardous materials. Let me just. Okay, so basically, hazardous materials, chapter 44. And this is all straight memorization, a little bit of common sense. Okay, more than 4 billion tons of hazardous materials are actually shipped to the US every year. Examples include explosives, gases, flammables, corrosives, and radioactive materials. EMTs must actually be able to recognize indications of hazardous materials emergencies. So the key thing is that you guys carry a book inside your ambulance. It's one of those, every ambulance should have this book. And it tells you what type of material you're actually going to be exposed to. Hazardous material spills and other incidents are common problems. Uh, and I mean, 18 wheelers do flip over. So, I mean, it might not be whatever's in the tank, it might actually just be the diesel itself. How to identify hazardous materials? What is a hazardous material? A hazardous material poses a threat to or unreasonable risk to life, health, or property if not properly controlled. Principal dangers are toxicity, flammability, and reactivity. In other words, radioactive material. I don't know if you know this, but there's a like from hospitals where they actually take X-rays, they have to get rid of some of that stuff that causes the radioactivity, and sometimes it's actually being transported out. The walls around their the the X-ray department are lined up with lead, believe it or not. Okay, so basically, we're going to be using the acronym TRACM, which basically is the types of damage from hazardous materials. It could be thermal, like heat sources burning and radiant heat; radiological, like nuclear fuels and byproducts of nuclear bombs; asphyxiation is the lack of O2 due to chemical vapors or heavy gases; chemical, which is toxic or corrosive chemical; uh, ideological, this is biological hazards; or mechanical, which is trauma from bullets, shrapnel, and so on. Now, we do have placards and shipping papers. Now, the placards themselves are what's on the side of the units, and the shipping papers is what should be inside the unit, letting the driver know what he's carrying. You use the the U.S. Department of Transportation, always known as DOT, requires vehicles containing hazardous materials to actually be marked with labels or placards. A vehicle driver must have shipping papers, which actually identify the exact substance, quality, and origin of and destination where it's going, where it came from and where it's going. Now, this is just an example of all the placards that are out there. Just an example, okay? Now, the U.S. Department of Transportation requires packages, storage containers, and other containing hazardous materials to actually be marked with a special hazardous materials. Now, we have the book that tells us what it is, but there are some signs that should tell you what type of stuff that they're carrying. Like if they have a flame on, it basically means it's flammable. The radioactive sign is radioactivity. There's also a biohazard sign right here. They let you know that they're actually carrying biohazards. So if you look at this placard, it's a fire hazard because it's got a flame. Now we don't know what the 1866 and the 3 stand for, so that's what we have our books for. Identifying hazardous materials, placards and shipping papers. The NFPA 7-source system, the National Fire Protection Association placard system is used to actually to mark fixed storage containers. Now, this is the book that I'm telling you that you guys should all have, and it's printed every year. So I believe it's printed every year. I know that you just try to get and it's free. You just have to carry it inside your unit so you can know what to carry. Okay, NFPA 704 labeling on the tank itself. And the colors also mean a lot of things. Placards and shipping papers, and material safety data sheets also help identify the hazardous materials. Yeah, safety data sheets required to be in a standard format. 16 sections are required to be actually provided. Visual clues, smoking or self-igniting material, extraordinary fire conditions, boiling of or spattering of the material itself, wavy or unusual colored vapors, characteristically colored vapor clouds, frost near the container tank, and unusual condition of the containers itself. It's really banged up or whatever. Look for clues of potential hazardous materials such as signs. Now, this one tells you confined space. So all this means is that there's some type of gas that if you get into confined space, you might actually asphyxiate. So you need to have a proper equipment to actually enter the tank. Look for clues of potential hazards, materials such as storage tanks. And I believe this is not a silo, but in Stark County, I've seen silos. And close to Houston also. Resources, you have the American Identifying Hazardous Materials, and the American Chemistry Council, Poison Control Center, USDOT Emergency Response Guidebook, the Chemtrec and Chemtel. The WISER wireless information system for emergency responders is available as an app or downloadable program. Resources. When contacting a resource, provide the following: your name, callback number, and fax number, nature of, and location of the product, a United Nations identification number or name of the product, name of carriers, shipper, manufacturer, consignee, and point of origin. Resources. When contact resources, provide the following: type of container and size, quantity of material, local weather conditions, number of injuries and or exposures, emergency services that are present or are responding to the scene. Okay, training required by law, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, and Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, have developed regulations to enhance the safety of rescuers for a more effective response. Training required by law, first responder awareness. This is the level of usually required by for EMTs. First responder operations help stop the spread of the material. Hazardous material technician, which is a plug, patch, and stop and release of the material. And hazardous material specialist, which is site command and support activities. Never attempt a hazardous material rescue unless you have the specialized training and equipment. Request help, locate yourself and bystanders uphill, upwind, and upstream, and always from the danger. General rules: protect the safety of all rescuers and patients, provide patient care, decontaminate clothing, equipment, and vehicle, avoid risking your life and your health if the only threat is to the environment. Now, we have this acronym called RAIN, also Awareness of Responsibilities of Hazardous Materials Incidents. R is for recognize, the hazardous material incident has actually occurred. A is to avoid contact with the hazardous material. I is to isolate the area, and N is to notify the appropriate authorities or response agencies. Decontamination, be familiar with the procedures unless specifically trained to hazardous materials. Operation level EMTs was not expected to actually take part of the decontamination procedures. 69% of the decontaminations are removed from the clothing itself. Uh, Incident management, yeah, the pre-incident planning is essential and should include one command officer, clear chain of command, established communication systems, and pre-designated receiving facility. Or what hospital is going to be set up for this. Identifying the plan itself, establishing the command system and command post. Get information as follows: the nature of the problem, identification of the hazardous materials, the type of condition, the material of the containers, and existing weather conditions. And the reason, and I'm going to tell you one, we were trying to set up, well, we did set it up uh, to an extrication training in Zapata. I remember this. Uh, and I remember I was asked to reevaluate the whole thing. So what these guys were doing is they try to make it to where there was a car accident or something or a bus accident. And they had a whole bunch of students, and what they were going to do is they had barrels that they had diesel on it, and they would turn them on so you can see the smoke. Now, with that, I didn't even bother to check, but I remember that when we started, the wind was blowing one way, and then the cold front came in and it started blowing the opposite way. So you need to know the weather, whether there's you know, I'm with the weather. You need to know, um, the environment that you're going to be in. Now you have to do whether there is a presence of fire, the amount of time that has actually elapsed, the scene work already done, the number of patients, and the danger of victimizing more people, and establishing the safety the safety zones. And safety zones should not be downwind. Okay. Establishing safety zones. The hot zone is where the contaminated can actually be present. And I know that I've dealt with a couple of situations where there was chemical spills, and whoever the medic was, which I can tell you who it was, is usually one of the subordinates that I used to have working at the college, Janelle Billings. He actually decided to bring the hot zone with her in the vehicle, transport the patients while they were still contaminated. Then they started having the same signs and symptoms of the patient. They got to the hospital, and they found out that the patients were still contaminated, so they had to close down the whole ER with me and the students stuck inside. Because I was taking care of some students at that point, because she didn't evaluate the hazardous material. So the hot zone, the warm zone is still danger, contamination from patients and rescue personnel, or actually exited the hot zone. And the cold zone should not contain any contamination. So I should kind of show you the picture of it. So the hot zones where the contamination is at, the yellow zone is basically is where you kind of wash the patients down, and the cold zone is when there's no more contamination available. Now I'm going to tell you, uh, I've, uh, I've seen it used incorrectly, and I've seen the people, some people that just don't know what the hell they're doing. And I remember I was taking care of the same semester. I was taking care of some students at the clinical site, the hospital, and I overheard. I usually like to put myself right next to where the radios are at, and I overheard Yeah, the same ambulance, I mean, the same company, the same people, saying that they had gone to uh, there's this place in downtown McAllen who what they do is they wash a lot of clothes. You know, they wash clothes and then they resell them. And some of the chemicals that they use are hazardous to clean the clothes. And I remember as soon as I heard that there had been a spill and they were bringing in the patients, blah blah blah, they were covered with this. I dismissed the students. I was not going to get trapped inside the ER for about 4 or 6 hours. So I dismissed it. And I remember when I was walking out, I saw one of my friends, one of the OBGYN doctors there, and I told her, hey, if you don't need to be there, don't, because you're going to get locked in. And then I explained to her, and she said, well, I was just going to check out a couple of patients, but they'll let me know they're okay. Okay, so basically, guidelines for hazardous material rescues, emergency procedures. Any rescuers who are exposed must actually be decontaminated with soap and copious amounts of water. In other words, copious means a shitload of water. Report exposures and obtain a medical examination. Equipment and vehicles must also be decontaminated. Now, I did read once where there was an ambulance that was actually contaminated with radioactive material, and they actually had to bury the ambulance somewhere because there's no way to decontaminate it anymore. So basically, there are devices that you can actually test for hazardous materials. And they usually have like I mean, it's not a Geiger counter, but it should tell you how much parts per certain chemicals are in the air. And they're specific to the chemical that might actually be involved in this. There's a rescue decontamination process to where they make like a little swimming pool. And I remember this very vividly because when they brought that first case in, they were decontaminating the patients. So they built this little thing and they would wash the patients outside of the hospital ER. Now, the only thing that I didn't see correct is that that water was actually draining into a drain hole. So the contaminated water went into the to contaminate the water reservoir that we had. But nobody's supposed to have known about this. Okay. Radiation emergencies, uh, exposure to contamination exposure. The patient is in the presence of radioactive material without any or it touching their clothing or body. The exposure must be harmful to the patient, and the patient does not become radioactive. Exposure to contamination, the patient has a direct contact with a source of radioactivity. The radioactive material is present on the patient's clothes or skin, and the patient is a risk to emergency personnel. Um, Guidelines for radiation emergencies: protect yourself and others from contamination. Do not attempt to decontaminate a radiation patient. And if possible, wait for a radiation safety officer to show up. Guidelines for radiation emergencies: if radioactive specialists cannot come to the site, place the patient on a body bag up to their neck. Cover the hair with a cap or towel. Wipe the face and disposable wipies and place them in a plastic bag for disposal at the hospital itself. Procedures for for radiation emergencies: time, distance, and shielding are critical to reducing exposure in radiation emergencies. Priorities: safety of rescuers and patient care, and decontamination. First, procedures for radioactive radiation. I'm sorry, emergencies. Scene safety: survey the area. Um, Survey the area for the radiation symbol. Be alert for other hazardous materials. Do not park near the damaged container. Put on a positive pressure self-contained breathing apparatus or the SCBA. decontaminate equipment, and decontaminate vehicle inside and out. Now, radiation problems caused by radiation sickness caused by exposure to large amounts of radiation. The onset begins in hours to weeks. Signs and symptoms include nausea, vomiting, hemorrhage, loss of appetite, fever, sores, and immune system suppression. Here's a dog around me. Problems caused by radiation injury, local injury caused by exposure to less penetrating particles. Signs and symptoms include hair loss, burns, and generalized skin lesion. Problems caused by radiation poisoning. The patient is exposed to large amounts of radioactive radiation internally. Problems include cancer and amnesia. Factors that determine the radiation exposure: the amount of time of shielding and the type of shielding used, strength of radiation source, distance from radiation source, type of radiation, length of exposure, and the amount of body exposed. Criminal use of hazardous materials. They have methamphetamine. Clandestine drug laboratories can actually result in the production of toxic gases, including phosphate. Get marijuana clandestine drug laboratories. It involves cultivation of numerous marijuana plants indoors. Okay, terrorist attacks. Terrorist attacks involving weapons of mass destruction may actually use nuclear devices, biological agents, or chemicals. And I know that they usually call them the dirty bombs because they're not real true radioactive bombs. What they do is they have an explosive material with radioactive material. So once it explodes, the radioactive material just flies all over the place. Okay, you guys have any questions? Let me see.
No, sir.
I just want to check one more thing. Give me a few seconds. We can probably cover this chapter also, which is the next chapter. Give me a few seconds. Okay, let's just cover this chapter so we only have one chapter to cover on Wednesday. Okay, this should be chapter 45. Now, this is when we're dealing with more than one patient. More than two patients, or depending on your protocol. So mass casualty incidents and incident management. Now, the key thing is about this is that if you go to the OSHA webpage and the FEMA webpage, you can take these classes for free and get certified. And be able to get hired in bigger, better places. Okay, the number of patients needed to declare multi-casualty incident varies according to the resources available. Incident management, triage, and disaster response plans are needed to effectively respond to multi-casualty incidents. Okay, an MCI, which multi-casualty incident, is any event that places excessive demands on the personnel and equipment and typically involves 3 or more patients. A variety of events can actually lead to multiple casualties. And it's better to call too many rescuers than too few. I know I'm gonna tell you one story that I remember when I was working in EMS. I mean, back in the day, we used, the paramedic geeks, we all carried what do you call it, a scanner. And a scanner is basically a device that will scan through frequencies so we can know what there's an emergency whatsoever. Now, the scanner could be used for good purposes or evil purposes. I know that at one point, uh, because I was always a strong believer, it's like, saying, if I'm not working, I'm not involved. And that's the attitude you should take because you're going to burn yourself out. But I remember, so there were some guys out there that had a scanner, and for whatever reason, they weren't working and they were always at the scene. There was one guy that we called the Flash. And for some reason, we thought that he was the one that was causing the accident because he was always there. Then we found out that he had a radio and he was actually listening to it 24 hours. So, and I remember that um, I remember getting a call that there was a nursing home that had a little bus, and the bus had flipped over, and the guy that always carried that radio just happened to be driving by. He wasn't listening to, but he called everybody. Okay, he called everybody plus more, and we all showed up to the scene. We saw the turned bus on its side. We went in there. And of course, we thinking that there was going to be a mass casualty incident. We only found one patient, which was the driver. The bus was empty, but this guy automatically assumed that the bus was full. So we were all there. It's like we were just chit chatting, laughing our butts off. Uh, and it was one of those where it was better to have called in case than not call at all. Okay, so NIMS provides for a consistent approach to managing disasters. The Incident Command Center, ICS, is a part of the NIMS itself, and NIMS provides the flexibility and standardization of all this so everything can actually fall into place. Now, the National Incident Management System, which is NIMS, involves a specialized training and preparedness. Relationships built during the preparedness are key to actually effective response. Now, NIMS is the template, the gold standard in incident management system and command. Now, ideally, ideally, what it's a structured thing, but if you're the first one on at scene and you have a mass casualty incident, you're in charge until the person that is in charge comes on and takes over. So you have to say that you have to set up the triage area, the safe area, all these little areas that you can actually transport the patients to. Now, it's worked to the advantage of responders and agencies in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in 2005, as shown in the disaster triage and treatment center or sector. I'm sorry. Incident command system provides a standardized approach to all scene management. Use best management practices to ensure the safety of the emergency responders and others, the achievement of tactical objectives, and the efficient use of resources. And the resources vary. So the incident command director directs the response to coordinate resources to multiple casualty incidents. And this is a guy that has a truck with all the radios. Okay. Feature for the incident command system: use common terminology and simple English, employs common designations for all organizational resources, incorporates manageable spans of control, identifies of incident facilities, and use distinct titles. Features with the ICS: incident action plans to identify the objectives to actually be accomplished, integrated communications approach, and the core accountability at all levels. Designated incident command systems: you have the command, finance, administration, logistics, operations, and planning. And you get, if you take those FEMA classes, which are free, you learn more about these. So basically, this is what the hierarchy looks like. Yeah, the incident commander, operations sector chief, the EMS branch director, and from the EMS branch director, you have the triage section, the treatment section, transport section, staging unit, loader, where they're going to pick up the patients and take them to the hospital, and the morgue, which is going to, contain all the dead bodies. Okay, incident command system is initially assumed by the most experienced and senior person of the first arriving service. Incident command can actually then be transferred to the most qualified person in an orderly manner. Okay. Responsibilities of EMS units may actually include triage unit, treatment unit, transport unit, staging unit, and morgue unit. Now, basic organization of EMS operations, you have the incident commander, operations section chief. They have the triage, treatment, and transport. Now, triage is where you're going to actually determine what tag the patient is going to use. It's going to be red, yellow, green, or black. Black meaning death. And then the people that qualify are going to go to the treatment unit, and then if they qualify, they go into a transport to actually be transported out. Triage is a system used to sort patients to determine the order in which they receive medical care or transport. Sometimes that's the hardest thing that we can do, is determine who's going to be living, who's going to be dying. Now, there are key things that you need to follow. Triage determines in which a person needs immediate emergency care to survive the injuries, which patients will actually live or be delayed emergency medical care, and which patients will die regardless of the emergency care provided. You can't be stuck in one patient trying to open up their airway when it's not open. You just have to jump to the next patient and tag them. Okay, at primary, secondary triage. Primary triage, this task is by the first EMS crew. This is typically conducted at the incident site. Patients are tagged with a color-coded system to actually allow organizations and the removal from the incident site. And patients are moved to the triage unit where the secondary triage is performed. Now we have what we call the START triage system. The system that uses universal colors to identify priority. It is used for patients older than 8 years of age and who weigh more than 100 pounds. Each patient is triaged in less than 30 seconds. Okay, the patient is assessed for respiratory status, is the airway open or not? And if it's not, can you open it? Perfusion and mental status. Now, the triage systems, you have the ability to walk. This is ambulatory walking wounded. Any patients who are already up walking around the scene and who indicate that they can get up and walk around, be collected and moved to the safe area. Any patients who can actually walk is usually tagged green color. When we're dealing with respirations, it says the non-walking patients by listening and feeling for respiratory effort. In perfusion, you assess the capillary refill and radial pulse. And when it comes to mental status, use the patient to squeeze your fingers to see if they actually follow your commands. And basically, this is what the triage system kind of looks like. So if they're not, then you tag them. If there's no response, they're dead. If they are, it might actually be immediate. And then you go and can actually follow simple protocols. And then, of course, you have the green one, which should be the walking wounded. Okay, Jumpstart pediatric triage system accounts for the pediatric differences in physiology used on only patients who appear to be a child. It says the following: respiratory status, perfusion status, and mental status. SALT triage, which is the global sorting. You have global life threats, purposeful movements, and patients capable of walking. Life-saving interventions, assessment of individual patients, and treatment and or transport patients. And this is the little tags that we have. And if you notice, there's different colors. There's a red, yellow, green, and black. Black basically meaning that you have no pulse and you're dead. Green is you're walking wounded. Yellow is medium or second priority, and the red one is high priority. And it tells you here what they're actually you're going to be looking for. And the U.S. personnel must actually be have a universal understood triage identification tag system, as shown in this photo. Basically, you're going to be tagging the patient, and that's the color that you're going to be putting them in. EMS personnel must actually universally understood triage identification tag system, as shown in this photo again. So this is priority 2, which is yellow. Put in the tag, and he should be treated accordingly. Okay, treatment. The treatment, staging, and transport unit leaders actually make decisions about priority transport. And you should already know what hospital you're going to be taking them to, so they can keep tag on what hospital the patient went to. You don't want to lose a patient. Staging unit. The unit leader monitors, inventories, and directs available ambulances to treatment unit at the request of the transport unit leader. The transport unit ensures ambulance accessibility, or ambulance accessibility, and to transport occurs with the direction of the incident commander. Communications, expect a variety of MCI communication difficulties. Follow through. When the patients have been transported, EMS personnel may actually be needed to assist the hospitals themselves. Reducing post-traumatic and cumulative stress. Try not to become overwhelmed by the incident care for one patient at a time. Rest periods should be provided. Each worker must be fully aware of their assignment, and someone should circulate and look for signs of exhaustion or stress. Reducing post-traumatic and cumulative stress. Rescuers should be assigned tasks appropriate to the level of the skill level. Food and drink should be provided. Rescuers should be encouraged to talk among themselves, and rescuers should not have the access to, rescuers should have access to trained counselors after the incident, so you can debrief yourself. Disaster management. The disaster is a sudden catastrophic event that actually overwhelms natural order and causes great loss of property or life. There is a great disparity between the casualties and resources, and the disaster may be natural or man-made, like in hurricanes or whatsoever. Requirement of effectiveness, disaster assistance, preparation of the entire community, careful planning, ability to quickly implement a plan, and effective communications among responders themselves. Requirements of effective disaster assistance, applications of triage skills, organize quickly and utilize all emergency personnel, adapt a plan to meet special conditions, contingency plans for shelter and transportations for the community, and do not do the greatest good for the greatest number of people. An evacuation and warning message should be communicate the following: the nature of the disaster, its estimated time of impact, and estimated severity. Safe routes out of the area and destinations for those who actually evacuate. I remember there was a big cluster that happened when there was a hurricane coming towards Houston, and everybody was trying to evacuate the area. And I remember there was a bus that actually turned on fire with a whole bunch of people from a nursing home. Okay, disaster communication systems, backup systems should be included. System details should be designed ahead of time. Appoint one person communicates with those outside the disaster area, and this person should stay in contact with hospitals and rescue units. The area-wide communications are vital. Provide a central registration area. Road conditions and alternative routes are constantly monitored and updated. Monitor hospital status. Do not allow vehicles en route to the hospitals to actually communicate with hospitals except if an emergency occurs en route, and include communications recording ability. The physiological impact of disasters, survivors suffer many negative emotions and physical effects. Reactions depend on the age, physical health, and emotional health. Helping disaster patients, families of patients need to and deserve accurate information. So that's why you keep track of all the patients. Reunite families as soon as possible. uh, Helping disaster patients, group people with their families and neighbors, encourage people to do necessary chores, provide emotional structure and expectations for the emotionally injured, and help patients confront the reality of disasters. Do not give false reassurances or assurances. Assure patients that accepting help is no way a sign of weakness, and target high risk patients for interventions. And that should be it for this chapter. Okay, so remember, let me see if I can get rid of this. That we're coming up to a test on Friday. I'll see if I can have it on Friday or maybe not on Monday. That way we can actually hopefully cover some extra material or go over tests on Friday. But it just depends. Any questions? Okay, so I'm gonna go and see if I can see you on Wednesday then to deal with the last chapter, which is I think is terrorist or something like that.